Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Safety Brief, your go-to podcast for all things cybersecurity. I'm your host, Elizabeth, and today we're continuing our spooky series in celebration of Cybersecurity Awareness Month for October. This episode is all about botnets, or also known as zombie networks. As always, I'm joined by our amazing experts, Mike and Matt. Thank you so much for both being here today.
Thanks for having us.
Happy to have you. So let's dive right in by breaking down what a botnet is and how it operates. And since we're in the spooky spirit, let's address the zombie in the room and explain why our botnets also called zombie networks.
Yeah, I'm not gonna be the most up to speed with zombie lore and DayZ and Walking Dead lore, so forgive me for wherever the examples are maybe misplaced. But generally speaking, zombies are not aware of what they're doing and don't have maybe a total control over what they're doing. And so now, by that definition, maybe we have more zombies today than we think. But the whole mindset of botnets and zombie networks are exactly that. They could be very simple devices, they could be very complex devices. Most of the time, they're going to be things that are simple in format, like an IoT device or something that's been hijacked and used for alternate purpose. Okay. And this is most often used by threat actors. So a botnet attack is mainly assembling this zombie army, if you will, of devices that have no clue what they're being used for other than, users still using them. This can be a laptop that was compromised that a user has no clue that it's still compromised, right? It could be this way for months or years even. So, but ultimately it is a way of creating an inventory of machines where a threat actor can launch an attack from, and those machines are not even aware of what they're being used for, nor if they're compromised.
That's accurate.
I'd like to give our listeners some real world context on how common botnet attacks are and what are some examples of them. The first example that comes to my mind is in 2016, it was used to bring down major websites like Twitter and Netflix. Another is the Emotet botnet, which started as a banking Trojan and later evolved, excuse me,
Didn't
into
really
a
turn into a
platform.
botnet though. Emotet had tendencies to act like it was a botnet, but it did not have a centralized control. So it was underneath different purview for those that were actually leveraging the attack. Mirai would be a better example of a botnet because it was a pure botnet from what you would be looking at. It had a centralized control, it had a specific group that was overseeing it. It was used to leverage countless different things from denial of service attacks to farming cryptocurrency to basically you name it, and they could actually use the machines for it. Um, it was really ingenious the way they leveraged it as well because it went undetected for quite a while, and then finally there were detections that were occurring, but there were so many machines that were infected at that point that it was almost as though they were fighting a losing battle to try and get everything handled until they killed the command and control servers that made it to where it could no longer communicate back. But I mean, honestly, that's kind of the thing with zombies. The only way you can kill a zombie is take their head off. The only way you kill a botnet is take his head off. And that was interestingly enough, it made major news when the joint task force took down the botnet. But spoiler, they didn't actually take down the botnet. It's still there. They still have control over some machines. They always will. I mean, that's the unfortunate truth about what you're looking at is we're never going to be able to stop it completely. And as much as I hate to say it, if you have one of these things, yeah, there's less security on these, and these get turned into a botnet much more frequently than any computer does. And sadly enough, they're actually stronger than most people's computers. But we're not going to get into that one.
I'm glad you brought up DOSing as well, because a lot of people don't know that there's a difference between a DOS and a DDoS. So there's DOSing with one computer, and then there's DDoSing with multiple computers. And most of the time, when a DDoS is taking place, it's with a botnet. It's utilizing multiple sources in order to flood that network.
Mm-hmm.
Mike, any examples or real world context from your big brain over there?
Love how you called on him right as he's chewing. That was
No,
I'm sorry,
I
I
don't know
wasn't
about a big
looking.
brain. If I was a zombie, I'd have a big target though. You have a
No.
big head. I think real world examples we've seen, again, it could be as simple as something specific to a handful of office machines used to authenticate and take down a server. It could be as something as grandiose and as large in scale as every Amazon Alexa running a certain version number that hasn't been updated, utilized and fed a bad config file or a bad type of, update file, firmware file that renders them, hey, everything is still intact. And I think that's the most deceiving thing about the zombie component of this is in a ransomware attack, that machine is offline. In a any form of attack where that machine's encrypted, that machine no longer ceases to function. That was the end of the kill chain, right? Like they've achieved their means is the threat in the threat actor's world. And so
where
the interesting
kill and
component,
kill chain kind of identifies that it's going to be dead at some point.
right? But in a zombie attack, like that machine has been compromised for a larger goal, for a higher goal. And again, the intent of the threat actor is to maintain their clandestine nature of accessing that machine. And so they don't want the machine to slow down. They don't want the machine to be encrypted. They don't want the machine to stop. They want the machine to just keep running. They don't want the user or the administrator or anybody responsible in that environment to even know it's used for that. So where zombie, botnets are most often discovered is during like network assessments. And so if you're looking at a network assessment, being able to see from a really, really clear pane of glass what connections are being made from the network outbound and from outside the network inbound. And so, but once you see those CNC, those command and control connections, that's where you're able to tell, hey, maybe the scope is just our environment is compromised and we need to remove these connections and add some additional hardening on the firewall, as well as look at the endpoint. Or if it's all outbound, meaning every single connection is going from machines in our network to some clandestine unknown servers and then somewhere else, well, that's even more concerning. And so in that case, you can have a bunch of Cobalt Strike beacons in your environment. You have no clue that you do. And so I guess in the real world example of this is going to be caught or first seen most often from a network layer, from a layer 3 layer. So you really need to have real robust network monitoring in the form of a next generation firewall. We wield a lot of Palo Alto networks and we're able to discover this stuff and prevent it. But discovery is more during the assessment component, right? And again, every environment is different. When you go to deploy it, the hygiene can be good, the hygiene could be bad. Maybe it's a brand new office. There is no hygiene. There's no baseline. But not only do you want to be able to detect it, but you want to be able to prevent it. And so picking up on a zombie or a botnet compromise or attack is one component. Being able to prevent it is a whole other piece. And so you want to be able to do both.
The important thing to note is that with a zombie-based attack, like what you're looking at and what we're discussing, it's not going to be instant. With ransomware, the mean time to ownage is a little bit lower. You're looking at they're in there, they get the data, and then you're screwed within sub 2 weeks.
Yeah.
In most cases, it's less than that. It's 3 days, if even that, because they know that they have to get in, they have to get the stuff, and they have to get out before they get caught. With a botnet, they're not actually doing anything that raises suspicion. They're not doing any sort of an attack. They're not utilizing excess CPU. They're basically just sitting there. They're being good little soldiers and just waiting. Then they get the command, and it could be weeks, months, years down the road, and all hell breaks loose. And you get what happened with the PlayStation Network. That was an orchestrated attack from a botnet that kept the PlayStation Network offline for multiple days. And I mean, it was not good, but those of us on the PC Master Race didn't actually bat an eye because we don't bother playing on consoles. So it didn't actually impact us, but it was fun to watch and see how it all played out, because Sony would come out and say, "Oh, we've got everything back online," and then there would be a response that would go up from the group that had the botnet saying, "No, you don't," and it was offline within 5 minutes of it coming back online. So until they figured out what was going on and found a way to actually harden their defenses, there was no defense. They were basically just throwing bodies against a target until it gave up. And it was highly successful. And because it's digital, they had unlimited bodies that they could just keep throwing back at it. One gets shut down, cool. Give it a wait time, give it 5-10 seconds, rethrow it. Reestablish the connection, start bombing it again. And that's a practical way of looking at it, but they had those machines under their control for who knows how long. That wasn't something that they woke up that morning and said, "Let's take over some machines and go attack Sony." That was, we need to have a large amount of machines to overwhelm their resources. And it took a lot of planning to get those machines and ensure they had enough online, because if you think about it, most of these attacks are going to be done from a worldwide picture. You're not going to take a bunch of machines that are just in one region, because what happens after 5 o'clock in most regions? Crap gets turned off. Botnets are great. They establish persistence. But if the machine goes offline, there is no persistence because it's not there to talk to. So you have to have them spread out. So it took them time to get machines all over the world with this botnet on there to orchestrate that attack. That's what makes botnets so interesting, is the fact that they can be there for so long and nobody ever knows about it.
And, I'm glad that you brought up the fact that they can be there for a long time without anyone knowing, because another big attack is also cryptojacking, and that's also used a lot of the times by botnets. And how that works is it uses your processing power from your device, allowing the attacker to mine cryptocurrencies without your knowledge. So it's taking away the processing power and wearing down your machine. So it's not always just to do attacks, but it's also used in other ways as well. Well, like most threats, botnets have the potential to spread and grow, and botnet attacks are unfortunately quite common, especially as the number of internet-connected devices increase. So what's the typical way botnets spread, and which devices are most vulnerable to being taken over?
I would definitely say, as far as most vulnerable devices go, you're looking at anything that is out of date when it comes to security patches. For example, you can have, again, IoT is going to be referenced a couple of times. You have mobile devices, both Android and iOS. If you're running a version or software version that's deprecated, a couple versions behind, as Matt said, it doesn't take a grandiose architect to find a hole. There are existing vulnerabilities in the code that are published, that are discussed online, and multiple entry points. No different than you can drive to a destination, and there's certainly multiple routes, multiple roads that may get you there. And so what you want to do is patch vulnerabilities wherever you can. And so that includes the network, that includes the mobile device, if that is something connected to like an enterprise network, or something, again, like a security camera, like an IoT device, a more simple device, but on the network that could result in further access being facilitated. So I would say that number one entry point is any unpatched or not security updated devices, for sure.
I know, I'm glad you brought up the IoT devices, because they're especially vulnerable because they often lack strong security measures. And how often do you think to update your security camera or your Alexa or refrigerators in today's day and age? So that's a big one right there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, for MSPs and their clients, botnet attacks can be exceptionally dangerous. So, what are the biggest risks they face? And more importantly, how can MSPs and businesses defend themselves from becoming a part of a botnet? Nobody wants to be a zombie.
Right. Or get attacked by zombies for that matter.
Hey, a
You know?
week ago, I
Very
would have been okay with being a zombie. I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah. No, I think it comes down to real strong due diligence at the firewall. And I wish all firewalls were made equal, and I wish all technology was made equal. It's just simply not the case. There is very competitive offerings from not just one, but multiple firewall vendors. But you need to have some level of security hardening applied to the firewall. I see a lot of people that either boot it up, apply some default policy, allow default ports, they're not monitoring it, and they take it as, well, my environment's running and I don't know of any active compromise, so I'm good. And I wish we could be that passive, but we can't. And so network monitoring is a big component of that. Are you monitoring international connections? And some will say, great, I have a geo-blocking rule. Fantastic. Threat actors have VPN. They can still access it from inside the United States. They can tunnel over here. And so by that nature, are you authenticating network connection sessions by Active Directory or a username and password auth or a VPN auth, right? Are we validating those connections in a way that is in line with a zero trust framework? And again, I wish we can just assign a /8 of anybody on this block is okay and a /16 of everybody on this block is okay. But if you have work from home users, you should be able to get their specific static IP at home. And I get it. Not everybody at home has a static IP, but you can start to develop this and start to evolve this of where, hey, I've been in multiple DoD applications where if I want to access a cyber range, I need to provide that range my public IP address so that they can allow me to even browse to that website and log in. It's not a public facing piece. It is something that is only gated off against certain IP addresses. And guess what? I have to do that every 90 days to keep that access active. It's not something that, okay, great, now my IP is on there forever. And, it's checked on usage. It's checked if I haven't logged in 30 to 60 days, they automatically remove my IP. There's controls like this, again, because the attack surface needs to be minimized as much as possible. Matt said it earlier. We're never going to completely eliminate it, but I wish we could just say, hey, users, click on this IP address or URL and log in from there. Guess what? Your login page is facing the internet. And if it's your login page versus the internet, it's going to lose 7 days out of 7, I assure you. And so limit that risk, limit that exposure by looking at specific IP addresses, specific zones. And again, on Palo, we can do this real elegantly with defining what is trust, what is untrust. And, with Global Protect, we're able to authenticate users against their Active Directory credentials, which ideally have MFA implemented. And so, again, that network component is going to be one of the biggest pieces to prevent the initial access of something like this, because you'll see it. You'll see that abnormal behavior if you have good monitoring, if you have good service deployed. But as far as preventing it, somewhat more difficult than detecting it. And that's where we recommend, obviously like a concierge service to be able to monitor that 24/7, because I wish it was a log that would just show up in the middle of the day at 1:00, but it's not always the case.
Thank you so much for that, Mike. Well, to wrap things up for today, let's talk about how BLOKWORX Sniper Network Security Service can help stop botnet attacks before they become a threat, and how our MVAP managed vulnerability assessment platform can detect it.
Yeah, most definitely. So in the scope of MVAP, that's our vulnerability scanning and attack surface mitigation platform. What that essentially does is it's the home inspector, the metaphorical home inspector that comes out and says, hey, here's the top 10 things or the top 20 things or whatever, however many things. Hopefully your home doesn't have more than 20, but some do, and mine may be one of them. Hey, here's the top things that you need to address in the order you need to address it in the name of hardening, and how to address it. Those two last components are important because we see a lot of partners come to us with reports of a vulnerability scan which just says roof outdated, And there's no guidance given past that. It doesn't tell you what kind of roof you should replace it with. It doesn't tell you how you replace the roof. And obviously some of those things are more, you're going to have a professional come in and do it, but others are SSH v1 enabled on a server. And that just stops there. Hey, this is the server, this is the IP, this is how you implement it, this is how you upgrade to V2 or whatever the specific hardening control is. We include all of that. So what our ultimate goal is mitigating that attack surface is, again, where these type of attacks are introduced. And, Sniper is one of our longest running services. We've been offering this as secure network perimeter response, and this is primarily powered by Palo Alto Networks. We have over 100 Palos in our fleet, and those range between anywhere sub 25 user environments, small, medium business, and more than 1,000 user environments, large enterprise, campus, hospital, like sized implementations. And so it's neat because Palo's gotten very much more flexible with their deployment scale. It is now accessible to the SMB vertical, whereas before it really wasn't. But where we see things are, we have a feature specifically called Wildfire. So what Wildfire does on Palo is it takes every file that transgresses the firewall through the connection, either inbound or outbound, but most often inbound because that's where users are downloading. And it sandboxes it. It looks at that file hash, it looks at that file, and if it is found anywhere on a nasty list, on a naughty list, it is immediately blocked. Now, if it is a hash that has never been seen before by any Palo, and every Palo in the world talks to each other through this service, it is uploaded in less than 15 minutes, monitored, and then scanned to see if it has a malicious score. And if it does have a malicious score, that update gets pushed to every single other Palo in the world. And so it is really spreads like wildfire. So it's really, really compelling. It's really compelling, specifically to file-based or file implant C2s. And when you have every single Palo in the world talking to one another, you have this mind meld, this kind of mega mind approach to the statistic of them never seeing it before, given Palo's scale. If it was 100 firewalls, then right, it wouldn't maybe be as effective, but every single Palo talks to one another through this service. And so really, really neat kind of 0-day protection there. Obviously, if it's something brand new, it does take 15 minutes, but that's where we talk about attack surface and risk mitigation.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up because, we've talked about it in the past where if, everyone's not talking to each other as a community in cybersecurity and they find a threat and they hold on to it and do their own testing and make sure that they prevent it or they have the information prior to sharing it, it can make it to where we're more vulnerable. So I do love that aspect that it's shared right away as soon as, the information is found. So if you do want to learn more about how BLOKWORX can protect you year-round from all things spooky in the cyber world, head over to BLOKWORX.com and check out 0-day prevention security services. You can also reach out to us at sales@BLOKWORX.com with any questions. Well, thanks again, Mike and Matt, for your insights today, and to our listeners, thank you for tuning into the Safety Brief. Remember, just like ghosts, zombies, and other creepy crawlies, cyber threats lurk in the dark corners. So adding a strong layer of security isn't just a suggestion, it's necessary. Sorry. Well, stay tuned for more spooky cybersecurity topics as we close out the month of October. And as always, stay frosty.
Thanks all.